Welcome to this edition of CAM Connects. I'm Christina Brungardt, Deputy Director of Contemporary Arts Museum Houston. Today, I will be talking with artist and director of the Glassell School, Joseph Havel. Joe is originally from Minneapolis and currently based in Houston and San Francisco. His work has been exhibited extensively throughout the United States and Europe and can be found in numerous museum collections. His work often examines the materiality of everyday objects, transforming them into poetic meditations.
Hey, how are you?
Good. How are you doing? Thank you for joining me today.
I'm glad to be here. I'm very happy to be here.
Where are you quarantining? Are you here in Houston? Are you at your studio?
I'm in Houston. I'm in North Houston, in North Lindale. I live in an old church, and my studio is in an old church. It was built in 1948 as a church. Then it was turned into a used auto parts place in the 60s. I first bought the studio 20 years ago, fixed up the studio, rented a part of it to a foundry that makes my bronzes, and that section got fixed up. But about 7 years ago, I moved into the top floor here. So I live above the studio here. So that's where I am. That's where I've been hanging out in the pandemic.
It's been an interesting experience. It's nice that you're with your work. I've talked with a lot of friends in New York, and they've been separated from their studios, so it's been particularly problematic for them. So,
yeah, it was, and it was good to be. It was a way to root things in a time where there was a lot of uncertainty. So that I did have these. I did have the sculptures to finish. I did have some these label works, which then seemed to make a great deal of sense because I have these. So the labels are done from words that I photocopy out of the book, The Dream Songs, which I've used in my work since I think high school or just after an undergraduate school. I started to use that book. It's a book by John Berryman, who was a poet in Minneapolis, where I went to undergraduate school. Who just outside of the river where the undergraduate art program was housed. He was a professor at the University of Minnesota, and he jumped off the bridge, which is the bridge over the Mississippi River, and killed himself. Actually, maybe 2 years before I went to school there. But I'd heard him read when I was in high school, and that book was an important book to me then, partially because it was, in many ways, it was one of the first things that I understood as a work of art. And so off and on, periodically, I've gone back and used components of that book. And probably the most evident way I've used it in the last decade is for these label pieces. And I find a word in my first copy edition of the John Berryman book that I think could be resonant as a single word pulled out of the poem that it was in, as a single poem, if it was the right color. And then I have it woven into a piece of fabric that's a clothing label by a manufacturer in Dallas. And so I have these labels that I made a few years ago which say hope. And I have another one that's also in the same color that says desire. And so I made 5 hopes and 1 desire in the first few weeks of the pandemic, which was it takes a lot of concentration and a lot of time. So it was a good way to quell anxiety while one didn't know what to do.
Well, what I find really fascinating and beautiful about your work is how language is very much a piece of the work, and how there's that slippage between the verbal and the visual. And I'm just curious what brought you back to it, and why specifically these words at this time?
Well, it now seems prescient, that I guess the pandemic was coming when I ordered the plexiglass boxes, because I was able, like 2 weeks at the beginning of March, I ordered the boxes, and I picked them up March 13th, which is the day that the Glassell School closed, and the day, basically everything shut down after that. With the lockdown. So, perhaps I had the labels already. So perhaps there was some kind of odd pre-essence. I hadn't made any label pieces for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. And I knew that there were some new patterns that I wanted to do. And one of the things about the way that they're done is that by putting the labels in edge to edge and only occasionally letting the words slip out and be seen, initially they're reviewed as abstractions. And they take forms from not exactly imitating Solowitz or Agnes Martins, but they take a certain reference to a minimalist painting, and depending on how they're done, they can be very tight or very sloppy in relationship to that. And I had decided that there were some new patterns that I could do that would make some sense. And so that was where it began. So maybe it was pre-essent. When I got the works, I was already committed to doing the label pieces, and then suddenly, hope and desire seemed to be appropriate to be working on in this moment. They seem to be, they had enough yearning that I thought they were appropriate for somebody who's locked down and who's wondering about contact in the future, and their color called French Blue, which I originally used for a desire label when I did a show in Paris, and they're the only label I've done out of maybe 14 in which the color on both of them are the same, because of my thought at the time when I did the hope label after the desire label was that hope and desire are very related. That desire is an acute form of hope in a certain way. So that's probably. And by now the words are a bit removed from the books that I took them from. They're sort of become this other kind of poetic action I can do. But they're the original source was in the John Berryman book.
One thing I also find really fascinating about these pieces and all of your work is that I always think of them as being like people. You get to know them slowly over time as you're looking closer and closer, and they have that kind of bodily sense to them because there is fabric in so many of the works, and yet it looks minimalist. So it reminds me of a lot of people I know. It's a little surprising as you dig in and you find hope and desire, these moments of yearning, that interest in connecting with the person that they're with, which is the viewer. And so I always have that moment when I encounter one of your pieces where it's like, how long is it going to take me to get to know this one?
Well, that's good. I like that. I'm not a particularly, I'm a somewhat shy person. And so, and I always want the works to, I think there's some work out there in the world that I really appreciate and love that's very declarative. I just don't make particularly declarative work. I want the work to unveil itself slowly because, and maybe that's as much part of just who I am as it is any intention. But I've by now doing this for a long time, that I like a kind of slower read that has implications and problems and seems to both be able to be outside of the moment, but yet be specific and mean something in the moment. Certainly when I finish these 6 label pieces, 5 hopes and a desire, as a group, they're all together. So they're not individual pieces. I looked at them and I thought, that they owed something to the moment that was very interesting. And that they had a kind of specific, almost a politic, strange sort of way. Not a declarative one again, but one that fit.
It's been interesting hearing how people are kind of growing through this experience and what they're suddenly taking a moment to step back and really get to know themselves, get to know their work. It's like a leap year or a sabbatical for all of us in some ways. Mm-hmm. To understand ourselves better and think about how we're going to reposition as we come out of this. So where do you think you fit with your work in relation to this? What have you learned from it in this period?
Obviously, it's a difficult time for so many people. People are losing their jobs and people are working, but it sort of drops you back into yourself in a way that I feel that I hope that is sustainable and that is good, that I can continue afterwards. We'll see. I think it is, actually. I think it changes. I think it's brought me back to the roots of why I was doing things prior to having to do them with less contemplative time.
And that's actually something I'm finding is really interesting in just life in general is, we're very much a go, go, go kind of world, and having the moment to stop and really think and reflect on each other and humanity and what's going on across the world is also something that I always look to art for, and brings out those moments of things like hope and desire and really what's the focus and what's important around us. And so
yeah,
it's really wonderful to hear you talking about your work as having this moment of contemplation, because again, I always think of them as people that you get to know and really getting to spend that time with them. And as we contemplate how others are doing and the world around us, art is always a mark of the society in the moment, in the time it's created. And so hearing how that's coming through in your work is really wonderful, and it's very impactful.
Yeah. And I think it's been good. I now am we're moving from one kind of critical moment to, with the whole, obviously with the George Floyd and other situations with, the threat to the racial threats against Black men and Black women. And our government's inability to clearly galvanize the people to a response. I now wonder what that will do in the rest of we're coming to some degree out of isolation, but it's a new.
Well, that's one of the things that I thought was a beautiful moment in an article by Arthur Danto. He talked about how when he went to one of the Whitney biennials, he was like, it looks like everything's all right, even though the world is not all right. From the time in which things were definitely not all right in the world. And so, I'm, as an art historian, I'm always thinking about what are people going to see 10 years from now? What are they going to see as this was our moment in the world, and how does it reflect it?
We're pretending that the world has become certain all of a sudden, and that we're, that we all know that we're on the way to economic recovery, and and all you have to do is watch, the people enthusiastically. I never expected, the stock market to rebound to the degree it has so quickly, while 40 million people are applying for unemployment benefits. So if anything, what you feel coming out of it into the art world is that there will both be some artwork, but maybe there will be a different art world that artwork operates in.
With everyone shifting to social media, CAMH Connects being on Instagram and YouTube, people have access now to art and artists in ways that I don't think existed before. It was emerging to a degree, and a lot of artists were utilizing Instagram, but this is creating different platforms, different ways of getting voices heard, really sharing moments where people can come together, and it's open, it's available. That's one of the things that actually drew me to CAMH is that, it's open, it's free, it's accessible always. But to actually have these moments for everyone.
It's interesting for me because I make things, okay? And I didn't start out as a sculptor. I don't really think of myself as a sculptor. I started to make objects to slow myself down because it was too easy and quick to change a painting or change a drawing without consideration, and it could be changed endlessly, and I could continue to work on it. So I started to make my first objects to just ask to force some space of some resistance in the material between me and a completed object, so that I would have to, I'd have to slow my thinking process so that the more ideas could be presented within a simple gesture, because there was enough resistance that I would have to consider them, rather than have one painting could be revised endlessly and endlessly and endlessly. Now that's a long time ago, but that's what I started. But I never thought, and I still don't really think of myself as a sculptor. I just think of myself as an artist that primarily makes objects. Although I make probably as many drawings as I do objects. But back to the original point was, when we're talking about the internet and the way things are happening on on Instagram and so forth, it is an interesting position when so much of the work that I make deals with material, and it gets presented as image. Even the drawings are important for their material, for the thickness of the, they look simple often, but they're white on a piece might be done over and over and over again until it's the appropriate thickness, so that there's some, feeling of when it bumps against the black that it does something that is, meaningful. And so that all gets flattened in an Instagram image to some degree. And that's an interesting thing, because I have a friend who works completely on, or works mostly online, and their work translates really well to a projected or an Instagram image, whereas mine is, the image is an artifact.
It's interesting, because we, with the work that's in our auction that you donated, we knew it wasn't going to reveal itself. So there's actually a video. We had to put video to it so that we can see it all the way around. So someone can see the river stones in there and the book that's embedded and what the resin actually looks like, how the cast comes off, and you leave pieces behind. That materiality, yes. The photograph just did not present it at all in its fullness.
Well, I got to go online and look at it, because that's sweet. That's wonderful. I like that piece very much, actually. That is one of the books is the Dream Song, is a cast of a first edition of the Dream Song that's in there. Because it's from there. That series of works was started when it basically, when my father died, we went to divide up the things at their house, and there wasn't really much of anything I wanted, but he had a handful of books. And it wasn't that he was anything like me or that we read the same things or something, but I found it interesting that he had, that he was defined by his books in a way that I probably defined myself by my books. And so I started to do these pieces where rather than using the text or the meaning of the text, I started to use the book as a kind of vessel, so that it would, if you could read the embossing on the side, you would be able to, you would understand that this was a vessel for a certain kind of meaning that maybe had been emptied out, but that the vessel remained. So anyway, that's when I did the book piece that you guys have for the auction, I started to drop some things back in that were sort of poetically bound to the text in one way or another. However, it was, again, just a material representation of textual meaning within a vessel.
But I'm just curious, where do you think you're going to go now? What's your next big project in mind?
Well, along with the other things I've been doing, I've returned to doing some ceramic pieces that I haven't shown. So when I went to a graduate school, I have a graduate degree in ceramics and in drawing, and I haven't done ceramic pieces for a long period of time, but I had some clay around here. So during the pandemic, I started to do some ceramic wall pieces, which are relate to what I'm doing now, and we'll see where those go. I think that they might be interesting. We'll see if they are. I have a show in January at a gallery, but not having, but that work is done. It's actually earlier work, and that's done. Not having, not, and this show at the Asia Society is supposed to open in September, and we'll have finished that piece by the time it gets installed late August. The one piece that's outstanding for that show, and that's got about, I don't know, maybe it's 8 bronzes in response to some early ritual Chinese bronzes from the 3rd century BC that were used in various ancestor rituals. So mine are in response to that. So those things are concrete, but the show that was going to be at Dallas we don't have a date on it now. It's been pushed, and I'm not quite sure when it'll be at the Dallas Contemporary. And that gives me time to work these things out without much pressure. So that's what I'm doing. Everything it seems that I do starts with really small domestic gestures. Not everything, but most things start with domestic gestures or domestic experiences. And then ask, well, what is the repercussion of this in the world? What is this little thing that we do in our lives? How can that mean something in the world? And how can it deal with these questions? I hope that work does that. I hope the pandemic diptychs do that. I'm not quite so sure about the ceramics yet, but that's early. We'll see. Maybe it's just maybe that's simply filling spare time. I think the label pieces did that this time. I think that's a good set of them. So.
I'm looking forward to seeing what's all coming out of your studio whenever we can gather again.
Yes.
But one thing I do always like to draw attention to is people can see your work out and about in a safe, socially distant way. I know you have some wonderful pieces on Rice University's campus.
Yeah, thank you. You can even right now, there are a couple of pieces we've talked about yesterday or the day before yesterday, went over to be outdoors at Hiram Butler Gallery, and you can make an appointment at Hiram Butler Gallery. They went there before they go to the Asia Society because he'd seen the pictures I posted on Instagram, and he wrote, "Oh, can we have these?" And so, masks on, they were picked up Tuesday. And they're in his garden, along with, he has a piece of exhibition you can see through his window, so that you can, if you go there, you don't even have to. So anyway, they're out there in the world. They're around. So
I enjoy going to see art that's out and about. It's funny because a lot of times you forget that there's so much wonderful public art, especially here in Houston, that you can enjoy, and it's safe, and wear your masks and go take a walk. It's healthy too. So,
right. Get out of the way.
Good way to fuel the soul. Well,
yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me in this conversation. I appreciate it.
Great.
Thank you.
It's great virtually seeing you.
It's great virtually seeing you as well. Thank you.